With me today is the consulting CTO of Malgavi Farming Corporation, Dimuth Samaranayaka. Welcome, Dimuth, to QUT.
Thank you, Darshana. Thank you for this opportunity.
First of all, I'd like to know what are the key challenges that you're facing in the farming industry right now?
Well, agribusiness actually face the same challenges as typical organizations. We have challenges around resourcing. We have challenges in competing in a competitive market. We have price challenges from our customers. We have challenges around maintaining a sustainable organization. And we've actually have challenges in terms of expansion and globalization. In addition to that, there are other challenges being a farming company around environmental factors like floods, droughts, pests, rodents. So it actually starts out to be a very interesting dynamics in terms of challenges, but it's a rich culture, and it's actually hundreds of years within the industry, and they've got some very good skills.
How big is the farming industry where you see it from the economic and social point of view?
Look, they hire a very large workforce. They're spread in rural areas, and they typically have seasonal workforce going through. So there's actually a lot of movement within that sector, and they employ a lot of people that are sub-industry. So whether it be mechanics, fleet transport, logistics, seeds, forecasts, they all actually come into play. Other procurement people like that make special materials, so they're packaging. They actually have a very diverse ecosystem that actually supports a larger industry, and they're spread quite across the southern seaboard. So they're quite, they have a large spread, and to a large extent, they've actually a large part of the economy in Australia.
In this unique setup, what's the role of IT?
Look, I think the role of IT is actually helping these organizations that are very process driven. They've got rich history, they've got a diverse set of processes. Some of them are quite manual. So the role of IT is actually about helping make these processes more efficient. As I mentioned before, cost factors are key. So the only way of actually getting costs down is to actually get some of these processes more optimized, identifying trends that you can actually optimize, and actually being able to benchmark. So they are the typical roles that IT play. But a lot of it also comes down to around workflow. So email, for example, is a tool that's actively used. And it's actually not just the communication side, it actually is used for workflow as well. That's how they actually, as a very rudimentary method, but that's actually used as well in terms of IT. Other factors is, as I said, because they're actually process driven, you have, at various levels of maturity, a document management system that actually supports the processes that are actually outlined. So that's the typical role that you find. But in addition to that, there's actually sub-specializations. For example, because they plan and manage large areas, crop management, preparation, GPS data, they're actually critical to the operations of field operations in agriculture. So you have spot solutions that are very narrow but very specific. So you can actually get a trend of what you've sprayed, how you prepared the block, withhold periods where you can't actually harvest. So they're all trackable through software these days. And I know that there's actually a couple of new programs that even CRSI are all actually investigating in terms of identifying when the maturity of the product is ready. So there are systems out there.
Okay. What is the current landscape like, IT landscape, proprietary versus homegrown versus vendor provided? What is the typical?
Look, I think it's actually the landscape's quite disruptive in the sense there's not one clear cut solution, because they've got solutions in terms of specific areas about crop management, GPS data, but the holistic view is actually somewhat segregated. So there are some very specific agricultural ERP solutions that are lightweight, but what we're seeing is that due to government regulations and other conditions, that landscape's rapidly changing. So that rapid change is not something that some of these software providers actually are adopting. And as a result of that, you've got to have a mixture between in-house grown solutions plus the best of breed solutions in place.
And for as the consulting CTO, what is your day-to-day process like at Malgavi, and what are your pain points? in managing systems?
Yeah, I think my day to day initially was actually around understanding what they actually had, and then trying to create a sustainable platform to be able to grow. So if we look at when we first started and where they are now, they've actually grown the business by about 50%, like 50%. They've actually started 2 other companies, so we've actually been able to set up a stable platform to allow them to grow. So the next part was actually around that stability. The next scenario is about sustaining business growth and actually the next level of sustainability and actually advancements, which we see is actually the core critical component. From your question around the challenges, a lot of the challenges, because these companies or agribusiness are typically in rural areas, connectivity and communications are actually one of our biggest challenges.
Right.
So the service types and the service delivery that we have for those areas are limiting. So we've got to actually think our way through in terms of how we service provide that, and actually how we actually can have a sustainable support system model around that. Because when you're in regional areas where you have people that come through as seasonal staff, so one season you might have one group, next season you have another group, you've got to make sure that the level of training required is actually so minimal that it doesn't provide an overhead on the organization. So they're the challenges we've got. In addition, finding good skills in remote areas, finding service partners in remote areas, and they're the typical scenarios. The other thing is that managing machinery, like you've got very specific barcode readers for the supply chain, and those solutions actually come into play for automation and process optimization.
Okay. If considering the challenges that you have, if you're looking at IT as a solution, where would you put your hand or heart for the need of IT for the future of farming?
Okay. One of the key areas that I personally believe, having worked in this industry for about 3 years with Malgai Farming Company and other companies, is that they've got a high level of manual processing, which is actually data collection to manual printed forms and various aspects. When you try and optimize any process, its information is critical, and data-driven business is actually even far more critical. The automation of this component to be able to analyze information, understand the supply chain, and actually start making adjustments to that supply chain in terms of benefits, especially in direction of wastage and even cost reduction, would be critical. So systems like that are quite critical, in my opinion. The other thing is that there's a rapid movement around government regulation that are being enforced, whether it be due to visa restrictions, whether it be to health and safety, other compliance reasons, right? That process itself is actually quite heavy-handed and manual process. A way of automating that is actually another component. The other thing I would think finally is actually, because these industries have very rich heritage, they actually have a lot of information or data, right? Processing that data to be able to understand the seasonal patterns and trending that could help them can help them forecast what their production volumes could be, and typical quality ratios of that production quality. So you can sort of understand that waste at a certain quality may not be going to a certain customer, but you might be able to find other ways to actually make that waste productive. I know of another company that actually manufactures carrots, that one set of the quality that they've actually that are not being sold, they've actually found a way to make beer with partnering with another company to make beer out of carrots, sort of thing. So they're the value-added process that you can look to, but you have to understand and actually spend time in that ecosystem to understand how you can actually modify it. That's where I think the next chain of value could be. Provided internet capability and communications are improved, analytics around water usage, crop usage in terms of for immediate data collection. So big data plays a part, but the communication factor does actually have a bit of a problem around that. Okay. So that's where I think initially, but there's also avenues for much more agricultural based ERP solutions to come through.
Right. Well, you mentioned about the agri ecosystem.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you about the IT ecosystem. Typically, we see ecosystems growing around industries. How mature, how sophisticated is the IT ecosystem around farming?
Yeah, I think when we look at, if you look at the traditional software that you have, most of the software base is actually built overseas. So there is actually a lot of, like, for example, ag data, there's actually, I think, farm manager, there's all crop manager, there's actually our software solutions out there. Some of them are actually built in foreign markets.
Right.
So the alignment to our market is a bit more challenging, especially when you don't have the ability to customize. So they're the challenges you find. I mean, there are software solutions, but customizing to our local conditions, our business requirements, our regulatory purposes are actually quite critical.
Yeah.
The other component is that, as you would know, over the last 10 years, people don't get trained as regularly as they would have before. So the ability to intuitively understand the application very quickly and have a simplified method of using to an end user is critical, because we're talking about in the agricultural workforce, average age could be anywhere between 40 to 55. So they're not very high IT users, but you have to use IT to make sure that the overall ecosystem and supply chain is effective. So that's where I think we're seeing more and more entrants in the market. There's still a gap, but I think there's actually a good avenue to improve.
A point related to that is the government or the state involvement in agriculture and state involvement in IT infrastructure. For example, the deployment of NBN.
Yeah.
What are the implications of those government-led infrastructure in farming?
I think that some areas are being reached, there's no doubt, but there's also a lot of pockets that actually aren't being reached. So those pockets are either going to be serviced through NBN, through that rollout, or pretty much through with Telstra. So we're basically pretty waiting on some of the infrastructure to reach it, because the issue is around, if you have comms and improving connectivity, you can actually deliver various types of lightweight services out there. So that's the challenge that being in such a large country we have. So I think we're improving, and I think some of the software developers are actually learning to build lightweight applications, so like cloud delivery applications. So they're the advantage I think that will come through as a result of the industry maturing in that software space for agribusiness.
If we have the same conversation 5 years from now, where do you think agri-IT would have moved to?
Look, I think there are two ways. One, if the communication's improved, there's a vast number of services you can do. But even if you have mobile connectivity, there's actually other services that you can actually be able to deliver. There's a trend at the moment where you have, I mean, if we go through the whole life cycle, we actually had client-server software, then web-driven software, now we have mobile phone different software. I think the view of what I see in the future would be, it'll be device-driven. So we won't have mobile phones, we won't have laptops. We'll have mobile phones, but we might not have laptops, but we'll have tablet-driven activity where you've got data on premise for that person to make an instant decision at that point in time. So what I'm seeing is that more information at site, on the people's hand, mobile components. I think that's the evolution that will have to come through. How it is supported from the wider infrastructure component is yet to be determined, because a lot of that's around government involvement, both at a federal and a local level. But that's where I think it's going to come. And as you work in the ecosystem, you also understand the type of software that's needed in these industries. So there'll be more intuitive, more specific software that are leading to a result, as opposed to having to be trained extensively in using a product. So that's where I see it'll rapidly change. And there'll be other technology, cloud-based technology will come through, they'll have other advantages to it. So that's where I see the value add in the next 5 years.
Dimuth Samaranayaka, thank you very much for joining us for the conversation.
Thank you, Darshan.